Picture two nations bound by a vast, shared circulatory system, one that stretches for thousands of miles across forests, prairies, and cities, connecting communities and economies on both sides of the border. But instead of blood, it's oil that pulses through these arteries, fueling industries, homes, and vehicles from Vancouver to New York. The U.S. and Canada have built one of the world's most integrated cross-border energy systems, a network so extensive that it's almost invisible in daily life, yet absolutely essential. Canada stands as the largest foreign supplier of crude oil to the U.S., providing more than half of all U.S. oil imports. This relationship anchors economic stability for both countries, supporting not just energy needs but also millions of jobs. This isn't just trade, it's a deeply codependent relationship. The pipelines that crisscross the continent are the arteries of North American energy security, ensuring a steady, reliable flow of resources. Every day, millions of barrels of Canadian crude make their way to U.S. refineries, a feat made possible by decades of joint investment, planning, and technological innovation. This flow is the result of trust and collaboration built over generations. Disrupting this flow would be like severing a major artery, causing immediate, severe consequences for both sides. Energy prices would spike, jobs would be lost, and entire industries could grind to a halt. Many U.S. refineries are specifically designed to process Canadian oil, representing billions of dollars in infrastructure investment. These facilities are optimized for the unique properties of Canadian crude, making the partnership even more vital. The relationship is not one way. Some refined products like gasoline and diesel flow back north to Canada, creating a closed-loop system where both nations benefit from each other's strengths and resources. Both nations add value at different stages of the process and rely on each other's expertise, technology, and markets. This makes any talk of separation or energy independence a deeply complicated proposition. For Canada, the U.S. is more than just a neighbor, it's a massive, reliable customer. The oil trade supports thousands of Canadian jobs, drives investment in local communities, and contributes significantly to the nation's GDP. For the U.S., Canadian oil means energy security, price stability, and less reliance on volatile global markets. It's a strategic advantage that helps shield American consumers and businesses from international disruptions. This partnership is so deeply intertwined that harming one side inevitably hurts the other. The economic, social, and political ties run deep, making cooperation not just beneficial but necessary. In any trade dispute or policy negotiation, this mutual dependency is the unspoken force shaping every decision. The U.S. Canada Oil Symbiosis is a powerful example of how two nations can thrive by working together, bound by shared interests and a common future. The idea of Canada turning off the tap to the U.S. is more fantasy than feasible policy. While it might sound like a powerful bargaining chip in political debates, the reality is far more complicated and fraught with risk. The oil relationship between Canada and the U.S. is deeply intertwined, built over decades of mutual dependence and massive infrastructure investments. Pipelines are engineered for continuous high-volume flow. Stopping them isn't as simple as closing a valve or flipping a switch. These systems are designed to operate under specific pressures and conditions, and any abrupt halt can cause significant technical and safety issues, including the risk of pipeline damage or even environmental hazards. Shutting down would force Canadian producers to cap wells and idle facilities, a costly, complex process that can take weeks or even months. Restarting production isn't instant either. It can lead to permanent loss of output from some wells, and the financial hit to both companies and workers would be severe. The entire supply chain would face a catastrophic bottleneck, with nowhere for the oil to go. Storage facilities would quickly fill up, forcing producers to halt extraction and causing ripple effects throughout the economy, from lost jobs to declining government revenues. Canada's own geography complicates things further. Some pipelines supplying eastern Canada actually dip into the U.S. before returning north. This means that a shutdown wouldn't just hurt exports, it could disrupt domestic supply as well. Cutting off exports could sever Canada's own energy lifeline, leaving parts of the country scrambling for alternatives and potentially facing shortages or price spikes. Alternatives like rail or sea transport are expensive, inefficient, and can't handle the sheer volume that pipelines move daily. These methods also come with higher risks of accidents and environmental damage, making them poor substitutes for established pipeline routes. The North American pipeline grid is designed for integration, not separation. Oil flows seamlessly across borders, supporting industries and communities on both sides, and any attempt to disrupt this balance would have far-reaching consequences. Dismantling it would cause cascading failures and leave Canadian producers with stranded assets. Billions of dollars in infrastructure suddenly rendered useless, with no easy way to recover those investments. The logistical framework would grind to a halt, paralyzing not just the oil sector but also related industries, from manufacturing to transportation, that rely on steady energy supplies. The threat of an oil cutoff is more bluff than real leverage. While it makes headlines, the practical barriers are so immense that it remains largely a rhetorical tool rather than a genuine policy option. Ultimately, the infrastructure itself limits political action. The physical realities of pipelines, storage, and supply chains mean that any drastic move would backfire, harming Canada as much, if not more, than its trading partners. Even if Canada could overcome the practical barriers, internal politics make an oil shutdown nearly impossible. Natural resources are largely under provincial control, especially Alberta, which would fiercely resist any federal export ban. Such a move would trigger a constitutional crisis, pitting provinces against Ottawa. Legal battles would be long and divisive, weakening national unity. The political backlash would be immediate and severe, risking mass layoffs and lost revenue. No government would survive the fallout of crippling its own top export industry. Canada's internal structure ensures the oil weapon remains mostly theoretical. Cutting off oil exports to the U.S. would devastate Canada's economy overnight. The relationship between Canada and the United States is deeply intertwined, especially when it comes to energy. Oil is one of Canada's most valuable exports, and the U.S. is by far its largest customer. Severing this connection would send shockwaves through every sector of the Canadian economy, from coast to coast. The oil and gas sector supports hundreds of thousands of jobs and contributes billions of dollars to Canada's GDP every year. It's not just about the workers on the rigs. Entire communities, small businesses, and even provincial governments rely on the steady flow of oil revenue. The sector is a backbone of the national economy, fueling growth and providing stability for millions of Canadians. Losing the U.S. market would force immediate shutdowns and mass layoffs across the country. Thousands of families would suddenly find themselves without income, and the effects would ripple outward, impacting local economies and social services. The loss of such a critical market would be felt in every province, from Alberta's oil sands to the financial districts of Toronto. The shock would ripple through the economy, investment would plummet, government revenues would collapse, and the Canadian dollar would tank. Investors would lose confidence, leading to a sharp decline in stock markets and a weakening of the national currency. This would make it more expensive for Canada to import goods and pay off international debts. Everyday imports would become more expensive, and a deep recession would loom. Canadians would see higher prices at the grocery store, on fuel, and for everyday essentials. Supply chains would be disrupted, leading to shortages and uncertainty for families across the country. Canada would also face fuel shortages and price spikes, especially in the east, due to disrupted supply chains. Gas stations could run dry, and transportation costs would soar, making it even harder for businesses and consumers to cope with the crisis. Using oil as a weapon would hurt Canadian citizens most. Families would struggle to pay their bills, and public frustration would grow. Protests and political unrest could follow, as people demand solutions to the economic pain. Meanwhile, the U.S. would quickly seek new suppliers, eroding Canada's market share for good. American refineries would adapt, turning to other oil-producing nations, and Canada could lose its most important customer permanently. The economic self-harm would far outweigh any leverage gained. The short-term idea of using oil as a bargaining chip would backfire, leaving Canada weaker and more isolated on the world stage. Analysts agree, an oil embargo would be catastrophic for Canada, triggering a crisis that could take years, if not decades, to recover from. To reduce its reliance on the U.S., Canada is pushing to access Asian markets. The Pacific Pivot aims to reach tidewater and sell oil to fast-growing economies like China and India. Major projects like the Trans Mountain Pipeline face regulatory, environmental, and political hurdles. Until new infrastructure is built, Canada remains tied to the North American system. Even with new pipelines, shifting away from the U.S. will be slow and costly. Shipping oil to Asia is riskier and more expensive than sending it south. For now, the U.S. remains Canada's main customer. The Asian pivot is a long-term plan, not a quick fix. An oil cutoff would hurt the U.S. too, especially its refining industry. Many U.S. refineries are built for Canadian heavy crude. Losing it would force them to scramble for costlier, harder-to-get alternatives. Reduced supply would mean higher prices for gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. American families and businesses would feel the pinch at the pump and in higher costs. Job losses would ripple through the refining sector and its supply chain. The U.S. can't easily replace Canadian oil with its own lighter crude without expensive retooling. The integrated market means pain on both sides. Trade actions boomerang. Canada has some leverage, but using it would be self-destructive. The result, mutually assured economic damage. The system's integration is both its strength and its vulnerability. The oil weapon debate flared during Trump's tariff wars. U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods sparked calls for tough retaliation. Some floated the idea of an oil embargo, but experts quickly dismissed it as too risky. The Trudeau government chose targeted tariffs and diplomacy instead, avoiding an energy war. This approach pressured Washington without harming Canadian consumers. Canada used established trade channels to resolve disputes, not the nuclear option. The less emotional responses may feel satisfying, but pragmatism preserves long-term interests. The health of the partnership outweighed short-term political wins. The Trump-era trade tensions tested the U.S. Canada energy bond. Despite political turbulence, economic realities pull both nations toward cooperation. The future depends on recognizing shared interests and maintaining a stable, efficient energy market. Both countries must collaborate on the global energy transition, investing in new tech and managing fossil fuel decline. Trust and partnership are essential as Canada diversifies, but the U.S. will remain its top customer for years. The pipeline network's efficiency is irreplaceable. Stability requires ongoing dialogue and mutual respect. The prosperity of both nations depends on working together through future challenges. The U.S.-Canada energy relationship is deeply integrated, built on decades of mutual reliance. Using oil as a political weapon is impractical. Logistical, economic, and political barriers make it self-defeating. Both economies would suffer, but Canada would bear the brunt. Canada's pivot to Asia is a smart long-term move, but the U.S. remains its main market for now. The infrastructure and economic ties are too strong to unwind quickly. Cooperation and a shared vision for energy security are essential. The real test ahead: can this partnership adapt to the global energy transition, or will national interests pull it apart? The answer will shape the prosperity and security of millions on both sides of the border.